I never thought the day would come when my parents, the self-proclaimed bastions of financial independence, would ask me for money. Yet, here we are. My phone buzzed 3 days ago with a call from my mom, her voice strained and tentative. The conversation started innocuously enough, weather, work, the usual, before she dropped the bomb. "Honey," she began, elongating the word as if trying to soften the blow, "your father and I need your help. It's about Catherine's wedding." My grip tightened around the phone, the air suddenly heavy. I already knew where this was going, but I let her continue. "You know how much we want to make this special for her," she said, her voice wavering slightly, "but things have gotten a lot, more expensive than we planned. We're hoping you could help us cover some of the costs. Just a loan, of course. We'll pay you back." I could almost hear the unspoken words hanging in the silence that followed, eventually. Maybe. For a moment, I didn't respond. Memories flooded my mind, sharply, vividly. I saw myself at 18, sitting at the kitchen table, my parents across from me, their expressions stony as they told me they wouldn't pay for my college. "You're an adult now," Dad had said, as if that explained everything. "It's time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet, just like we did." I pleaded, argued, even suggested a student loan. But they dismissed the idea outright. "Borrowing money is for people who can't manage their own lives," Mom had said, her tone dripping with disdain. "It's not how we raised you." The bitterness I'd buried years ago began clawing its way back to the surface. "I'm sorry," I said finally, my voice colder than I intended. "But I can't help you." Mom's gasp was almost imperceptible, but it stung. "What? Why not?" "Because," I replied, struggling to keep my tone even, "when I needed help for college, you said borrowing money was against your principles. Surely those same principles apply now." There was a long, heavy pause. Then she sighed. "That was different, and you know it. This is Catherine's wedding. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event. And my education wasn't important?" The words spilled out before I could stop them, sharper than I intended. I had to scrape by on student loans and part-time jobs while Catherine was at home, doing nothing except planning how to marry rich. Now you want me to fund her extravagant fairy tale? Sorry, Mom, but no. I hung up before she could respond, my hands trembling as I set the phone down. The nerve of them. Catherine and I hadn't spoken in 5 years, and honestly, I'd been better off for it. She'd always been spoiled, but our parents enabled her every whim like she was some kind of golden child. Meanwhile, I had to claw my way through life to get to where I am now, a software developer, making more money than the rest of my family combined. The last time I saw her was at Christmas, shortly after I'd moved into my first apartment. I was proud of it. It wasn't much, sure, but it was mine. I'd scrimped and saved for months to afford the down payment, and hosting Christmas dinner there felt like a small victory. But Catherine, true to form, had other plans. She arrived with her new boyfriend, a smug, polo-wearing trust fund baby named Greg, and spent the entire evening making snide comments about my place. "It's cozy," she'd said, her nose wrinkling as she glanced around. "But don't you feel a little unsafe in this neighborhood?" Greg had chuckled, adding, "Yeah, it's definitely not like the estate. We've got security and everything. Maybe you should consider upgrading." By the time dessert rolled around, I'd had enough. "You know," I said, setting down my fork with deliberate care, "unlike you two, I actually pay my own bills. Maybe when you stop mooching off your parents, you can lecture me about real estate." The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine's face turned an impressive shade of red as Greg muttered something about needing to leave. They stormed out, and I've barely seen her since. Now she was getting married to Greg, the same guy from that disastrous Christmas, and my parents were bending over backward to make it the event of the century. They'd already committed to covering the venue and decor, which were apparently so lavish they'd burned through their savings. And now, with the wedding looming, they wanted me to foot the bill for the extras Catherine had decided were absolutely necessary. The absurdity of it all made me laugh, though there was no humor in the sound. They couldn't afford this wedding, and they knew it. But instead of reining Catherine in, they were doubling down on their poor decisions and expecting me to bail them out. That night, as I sat on my couch nursing a beer, I found myself replaying the conversation with Mom. Maybe I was being petty, as some relatives had claimed. Maybe I should just let bygones be bygones and help out. But then I thought about everything I'd sacrificed to get where I am. The sleepless nights, the constant stress of juggling work and school, the crushing weight of student loans. My parents had stood by their principles then, refusing to bend even a little to help me. Why should I abandon mine now? I took a long sip of my beer, the bitterness matching my mood. No, I decided. This wasn't about pettiness. It was about fairness. And for once, I wasn't going to let them guilt me into cleaning up their mess. The fallout was swift. Mom called again the next day, her tone sharper this time. Your father and I are very disappointed in you, she said. Family is supposed to support each other. Funny, I replied, I don't remember that support being there when I needed it. She started to argue, but I cut her off. Look, Mom, I love you and Dad, but this isn't my responsibility. You made your choices, and now you have to deal with the consequences. I'm sorry if that's harsh, but it's the truth. The line went silent for a moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with disappointment. I see. Well, I hope you're happy with yourself. Am I? I'm not sure. But I do know one thing, I've spent my whole life playing second fiddle to Catherine. It's about time I put myself first. I never thought I'd see the day when my parents would ask me for financial help. The same parents who used to preach about the evils of loans and the importance of earning your own way. When they showed up at my door, visibly uncomfortable, I could almost feel the weight of their pride crumbling. The awkward silence that followed their request hung heavy in the air. My mom clutched her purse tightly, her knuckles white, while my dad stared at a spot on the floor, avoiding eye contact. I'm sorry, but I need to remind you of something, I said, breaking the silence. My voice was steady, but inside, I felt a storm brewing. Do you remember all those times you told me borrowing money was against your principles? That people should live within their means? You made it clear to me, over and over again. They looked at each other, clearly caught off guard. My mom's mouth opened slightly, as if searching for a rebuttal, but nothing came. I've worked hard to get where I am, I continued, my tone sharpening. And now, you expect me to just forget everything you drilled into me? How does that even make sense? They didn't say much after that. My mom muttered something about how they thought I'd understand, but they quickly left, their shoulders sagging under the weight of my words. I thought that was the end of it. But of course, it wasn't. The phone calls started pouring in the next day. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had opinions. Do you know how humiliating this is for your parents? Aunt Linda's voice crackled over the line. They've done so much for you, and this is how you repay them? They've told everyone you've changed, Uncle Raj chimed in during another call. That money's gone to your head. Gone to my head? I couldn't believe it. It was like I was in the Twilight Zone. I tried explaining my side, but no one wanted to hear it. They had already decided I was the villain in this story. The final straw came when my parents showed up at my door again, 2 days later, looking even more distraught than before. My dad's face was red, his voice trembling with barely restrained anger. Do you know what you've done? He demanded. What I've done? I shot back, incredulous. What are you talking about? Your sister's uninvited us from her wedding, my mom blurted, tears streaming down her face. She says we're an embarrassment now because we can't afford to pay for everything we promised. I blinked, completely stunned. Wait, how is that my fault? I didn't tell you to overpromise or to ask for help. That's on you. She said it's because of the family drama you caused, my dad interjected, his voice rising. If you had just helped us, none of this would have happened. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. You seriously think this is on me? I didn't ask you to commit to expenses you couldn't handle. And Catherine, she's always been spoiled and entitled. You created that monster, not me. That's your sister you're talking about, my mom snapped, her tears replaced by indignation. And she's the one who kicked you out of her wedding. Not me. I was shouting now, my patience completely gone. Don't pin this on me just because you don't want to face the consequences of your own actions. The tension in the room was suffocating. My parents exchanged a glance, their expressions a mixture of anger and defeat. Finally, my dad muttered, "We should go." And they did, but not before throwing me one last look of disappointment that stung far more than I wanted to admit. The fallout was swift. The entire family seemed to turn against me overnight, united in their outrage. I wasn't just the black sheep, I was the scapegoat. You're selfish, one cousin texted. Family comes first, and you've forgotten that. Do you even care about anyone but yourself? Another message read. I blocked them all. Every single one of them. I didn't need their judgment or their toxicity in my life. My grandparents were the only ones who supported me, but even they admitted they were getting tired of the drama. It's like they're all feeding off each other's anger, my grandfather said during our last call. Don't let them drag you down with them. I tried to focus on the positives, my career, my friends, the peace and quiet of cutting ties with people who never truly supported me. But every now and then, late at night, doubt would creep in. Was I being too harsh? Was I really the selfish one? Then I'd remember the smug way my parents used to dismiss my dreams, the way they'd laughed when I said I wanted to pursue something outside the family business. I'd remember the endless lectures about independence and self-reliance, lectures they conveniently forgot the moment it suited them. Still, a part of me couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. Family was supposed to be your safe haven, your biggest cheerleader. But mine? They seemed to thrive on tearing each other apart. For now, I'm choosing peace. Even if it means being alone. I hadn't even taken off my shoes when the knock came at the door. The day had already drained me, 8 hours at the office, an hour in traffic, and now this. I opened the door to find Catherine standing there, her polished smile barely masking the tension in her eyes. For a moment, I just stared at her, the years of silence between us like a wall she decided to scale without warning. 5 years. 5 years of cold shoulders and bitten tongues, and now here she was, uninvited, on my doorstep. Hey, she said, her voice softer than I remembered, almost rehearsed. Catherine, I replied, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. This is unexpected. She shifted awkwardly, her designer bag dangling from her arm. Can I come in? It'll only take a minute. I hesitated, then stepped aside. Sure. Why not? The living room felt smaller with her in it, her presence stirring up memories I'd rather forget. She sat on the edge of the couch, prim and poised, while I remained standing, arms still folded. It was a defensive posture, but I didn't care. I wasn't about to let my guard down. I'm here to apologize, she began, her tone carefully measured. For everything. For the way I treated you. For the things I said. I was selfish, and, well, I've been doing a lot of reflecting lately. I'm trying to be better. I raised an eyebrow. Reflecting, huh? She nodded earnestly. Yes. I'm getting married soon, and starting this new chapter has made me realize how much I've hurt people. You, most of all. I wanted to tell you in person that I'm sorry. Truly. I studied her face, searching for cracks in the facade. Her words were smooth, almost too smooth, like they'd been practiced in front of a mirror. But there was something else, a flicker of vulnerability that caught me off guard. Well, I said slowly, it's good to hear you've had some revelations. Took you long enough. She flinched slightly but pressed on. I'm inviting you to the wedding, she said, a small smile breaking through. Before anyone else. I wanted you to hear it from me first. How generous, I said, unable to keep the sarcasm from my voice. And this has nothing to do with our parents refusing to fund your big day? Her smile faltered. They told you that? They didn't have to. You think I don't know how this works? You need money, Catherine. And here you are, apologizing out of the blue. Convenient timing, isn't it? She sighed, her shoulders slumping. Look, yes, I'm in a bind. But that doesn't mean my apology isn't real. I'm trying to make things right, and I'm asking for your help because I trust you. You're my brother, and I need you. I let out a bitter laugh. Brother? That's rich coming from you. We haven't been siblings for years, Catherine. You made sure of that. Her expression hardened. You're acting like I'm some stranger off the street. All I'm asking is for you to loan me some money. I'll pay you back, I'll even sign a contract if that'll make you feel better. Just, please. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the years of her dismissiveness, the way she treated me like an afterthought. No, I said firmly. I'm not bailing you out. If our parents, the ones you've always defended, won't help you, why should I? Her face twisted in anger. Because you can afford it. You're just being spiteful. Is that what you want? To see me fail? Fine, then. I'll go tell my fiance's family that we're broke and can't afford the wedding we planned. Happy now? Thrilled, I shot back, my voice cold. Maybe it's time you learned what it feels like to deal with the consequences of your own actions. Her eyes flashed with fury, and for a second, I thought she might throw something. But instead, she stood, her hands trembling. You're a real piece of work, you know that, she spat. Fine. Forget I asked. Forget I even came here. Gladly, I said, stepping aside to open the door. Don't let it hit you on the way out. She stormed past me, muttering under her breath, and I closed the door with a satisfying click. For a long moment, I just stood there, the adrenaline coursing through me. The silence felt heavier than it had before she arrived, but there was also a strange sense of relief. I'd stood my ground. Weeks later, when her wedding invitation arrived in the mail, I couldn't help but laugh. Catherine was nothing if not persistent. Curiosity got the better of me, and I called her, expecting more dramatics. To my surprise, she picked up. You actually sent me an invitation? I asked, unable to hide the disbelief in my voice. Yes, she replied curtly. I meant what I said before. I'm trying to make amends. The money situation is sorted, by the way. No thanks to you. I smirked. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Did Mom and Dad pitch in after all? No, she said quietly. I figured it out myself. But they're still coming to the wedding. I never actually uninvited them, I was just angry. You're the only one who gets an official pass to stay mad at them. There was a pause, and for a moment, it felt like we were kids again, caught between bickering and bonding. I'll think about it, I said finally. But don't hold your breath. Wouldn't dream of it, she replied, a hint of a smile in her voice before she hung up. And just like that, the silence returned, heavier than ever. The silence in the room felt like a physical weight pressing down on her. It wasn't just their stubbornness that irked her, it was their sheer unwillingness to think things through. Her parents' need to compete with her in-laws was juvenile, but their audacity to twist the narrative? That was the real sting. As she paced the length of her tiny kitchen, the sharp click of her heels against the tiles punctuated her anger. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, her chest tightening with every shallow breath. They didn't even bother to ask me what I wanted, she spat, more to herself than anyone else. No, instead they had to go around telling everyone I didn't want them at my wedding. As if I'd ever say that. The memory of their last conversation burned in her mind. She hadn't uninvited them. She hadn't even implied it. Yet, they'd made their own assumptions and acted accordingly. And, of course, they'd chosen to vent their frustrations to everyone except her. Why face the truth when you can play the victim, she muttered bitterly, pouring herself a glass of water. Her hand trembled as she raised it to her lips, the cool liquid doing little to extinguish the fire inside. And now they're telling everyone their kids are terrible. Their own kids. What kind of parents do that? Her voice cracked, but she quickly swallowed the lump in her throat. This wasn't the time for tears. Not now. She thought she was alone in her frustration until her sister Catherine called. Their relationship had been strained, brittle like an old piece of china that had seen too many falls. Yet here they were, talking, really talking, for the first time in years. Catherine's voice on the other end of the line had wavered, uncharacteristically soft. I'm sorry, Catherine had said. For everything. For being part of the problem. I see it now. The way they manipulate. The way they twist everything. There had been a pause so long, she thought Catherine had hung up. But then her sister's voice returned, shaky yet determined. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I'd really like you to come to the wedding. At least one person from the family should be there. Please. Her initial reaction had been a cold, hard no. How could she even consider it after 5 years of silence, blame, and bitterness? But as the hours passed and the conversation replayed in her mind, something shifted. Maybe it was the rawness in Catherine's voice, or the genuine apology she hadn't expected. Or maybe it was the faint hope that this moment, could be the start of something new. The decision wasn't easy. Days of weighing her options turned into sleepless nights. Her grandparents, the only consistent pillars in her life, had offered their cautious support. If you go, we'll go, her grandfather had said, his deep voice steady. She's reaching out. That takes courage. Maybe it's worth giving her a chance. It was those words that ultimately led her to Catherine's wedding. But attending wasn't the right word. She walked Catherine down the aisle. Her sister's eyes had been red-rimmed, her carefully applied makeup barely holding up under the strain of tears. Their parents had refused to reach out, their pride too heavy a burden to lay down, even for their golden child. As Catherine adjusted her veil, her hands trembling, she looked up at her sister with watery eyes. "Thank you for being here. I don't deserve it." "Stop," she said softly, gripping Catherine's hands in her own. "Everyone deserves someone in their corner. Even you." It was an attempt at humor, but the sincerity in her tone betrayed her. Catherine's lip quivered, and for a moment, the years of animosity between them seemed to melt away. The ceremony itself was intimate, beautiful in its simplicity. The absence of their parents loomed like a shadow over the proceedings, but Catherine's fiancé, who had once been an arrogant thorn in her side, surprised her. Before the ceremony, he'd approached her, his face etched with genuine remorse. "I owe you an apology," he'd said, his voice low. "For how I treated you back then. I was wrong. I see that now. And I'm sorry." The words had taken her aback, leaving her momentarily speechless. But she'd managed a nod, her lips curving into a small, cautious smile. It takes a big man to admit when he's wrong. "Thank you." Later, as the newlyweds danced under the soft glow of fairy lights, she found herself standing off to the side with her grandparents. Her grandmother leaned in close, her voice barely a whisper. "You did the right thing," she said, squeezing her arm gently. "I know it wasn't easy, but you showed her what family is supposed to be." Her gaze drifted to Catherine, who was laughing now, her earlier tears forgotten. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a storybook ending. But it was a start. Would they ever truly repair what had been broken? She didn't know. The scars ran deep, and trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. But as she watched Catherine's face light up with joy, she realized something. Maybe it wasn't about fixing the past. Maybe it was about building something better for the